Hello. I'm Stephanie Curtis from MPR News. I'm the Director of Programming. I'm so happy to have you here. I love Talking Volumes, and I love the Talking Volumes audience. Thanks to all of you who are members, all of you who are subscribers to Star Tribune, and a big thanks to our season sponsors, Becker Furniture World and Bremer Bank. Next to me is Erica Pearson from the Star Tribune. You can read her work in your program. Hello, Erica.
Hi. Hi.
So you are going to tell us a little bit about your fall preview?
Yes, coming this Sunday in your Star Tribune, we have our Fall Arts Preview, which is our critics letting you know what to look out for this fall, all their top picks, and some in-depth features. Our book coverage, since we have so many readers here, will include a Q&A with a local author from Mankato, Rachel Hannell, who has a new book about Camilla Hall, a Minnesota woman who joined the Symbionese Liberation Army in the 70s. Sounds fascinating.
Wow.
Yeah.
My mom actually met her at a wedding once. I don't think she made it into that book, though. Thank you so much, Erica.
Enjoy, everyone.
I hope to see some of you at our next Talking Volumes with Celeste Eng, but meanwhile, let's just get the party started. Please welcome MPR News' Kerri Miller.
Thank you, Steph. Hi, everyone. It seems like a long time since we've seen each other, doesn't it? And I am really grateful you're here. Karen and I were talking backstage about people are still a little leery to come out to events, or they've got, just a few things that they're doing. So thank you so much for supporting Talking Volumes the way you do. One more round of applause for that. Thank you. All right. I always like to know what you've been reading since I saw you last, and I'm curious about what was on your summer reading list. So shout out some titles. Okay, you, ma'am, right over there. What were you reading? Think about it. No. Yes, sir. Yes.
Cloud Cuckoo Land.
Cloud Cuckoo Land? Ooh, that's a big one. Good. Very good. What else?
Alive Until You're Dead.
Excellent. Alive Until You're Dead. What? Yes, ma'am, right back there. The Sentence? Louise Erdrich. Well done. Yes, ma'am. What? The Milkman? Oh, I haven't heard of that. I'm intrigued. Yes. Excellent. The Old Ways. Okay. Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. Okay. Wow. Oh my gosh, you guys are stellar. Yes, ma'am. I didn't hear that. Okay. Think I caught that. All right. And one more, right there in the middle. Kent Nurburn. Okay. That's new on me, and it's fabulous. Thank you for rising to the occasion and coming up with so many fabulous titles. My reading list has just grown like it needed to. So I'm interested in Karen Armstrong's Summer Beach Reads, too. Did you catch? She recently did the Buy the Book in the New York Times, and I learned some intriguing things from that interview. What does she read when she's ready for a sexy new thriller? I'm going to ask her. When she's done immersing herself in Confucius and St. Thomas Aquinas, and she's like, I just want a sexy thriller. What does she read? Tonight, Ms. Armstrong is here with a book and a philosophy that I think of as companion to the Northern conservationists and writers that I know we admire in this part of the world. Here's Sigurd Olson on the power of nature. In wilderness, people can find the silence and the solitude and the non-civilized surroundings that connect them once again to their evolutionary heritage. Listen to Winona LaDuke. I'm not a patriot to a flag. I'm a patriot to the land. And I consider Terry Tempest Williams an honorary Minnesotan. She's just incredible. I love these words of hers. Wildness reminds us what it means to be human, what we are connected to rather than what we are separate from. Karen Armstrong writes in her new book, if we develop a mind that watches and receives and discover the fluidity of our natural environment, we may be able to recover some of our ancestors' vision of a sacred nature. Karen Armstrong's new book is titled Sacred Nature, Restoring Our Ancient Bond with the Natural World. Please give her the warmest Fitzgerald Theater welcome. You are loved here. You are among friends. I hope you know that.
Well, I wouldn't get that at home.
We talked about that. Yes. Okay, what does Karen Armstrong read when she wants a sexy thriller?
Sorry?
What does Karen Armstrong read when she wants a sexy thriller?
A sexy thriller?
Yes.
I don't know.
I've got a whole list that I can share. Okay, what do you read when you're not immersed in religious texts or research? What do you read to take your mind away from what you're studying?
Oh, I read novels.
Okay.
I read novels, and often quite repeatedly. I like reading things that I've read a second time. And I read the classics, Dickens, Thackeray, Jane Austen, a great favorite of mine. Beautiful, beautiful writing. But also modern people. But I love novels. I love getting immersed in a story and imagining different worlds.
Right.
And living in a different world parallel to one's own. I love that.
What is your most sublime reading experience?
My most sublime reading experience, I think it's been Shakespeare. The language, the brilliance of the iambic pentameter, to be or not to be, that is the question. Whether it is nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing end them. To die, to sleep no more, and by sleep to say we end the heartache, that the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to. And I once heard I was once taught how that sounded to Shakespeare's time.
How did it sound?
Quite different. It's more like to obey or not to obey. That is the question. Whether it is nobler in the minder to soffre the slingers and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take, and I like the heartache becomes hair touch. You see how language has changed so much over the years. He's really quite close to what we call Middle English, medieval English still. We're moving certainly into modern English, but it's the old pronunciations are still there.
I think from listening to that, it would be difficult, I think, for a modern audience member to be at the Globe Theater to understand what was happening. We probably wouldn't, right?
We probably wouldn't, no. I only know about that because I studied English language at Oxford.
I wondered how that paragraph or two has imprinted itself on your mind.
Well, I just liked it so much, especially hair touch.
Right.
So we studied the history of the language, starting off with Anglo-Saxon, and then moving in and reading great poems like Beowulf. And I had a very old professor, very distinguished Anglo-Saxon professor who taught. He used to make us write essays in Anglo-Saxon.
Wow.
I don't think.
Oh my gosh.
I don't think I could do it now, because I've sort of that's left behind me rather. But I did love that. I love the whole idea of the language evolving and changing, and wondering what Shakespeare would have made now if he saw his plays acted in
Right.
modern English.
Right. So, were your parents big readers? Was there poetry in your house?
No.
Novels? No?
No, not at all. I was very lucky because my parents didn't have a good education. My mother went to a sort of Catholic school, which seems to have taught her nothing at all. She's very clever, but no, because she's very, very clever. When my father went bankrupt, she had to take a job. Now, that was the 1950s when middle-class women didn't take jobs. And she managed to get a job as a sort of secretary in the medical school at Birmingham University. And she did so well. They gave her research to do.
Wow.
And when she died, I wrote a piece about her in the Guardian newspaper. And one of the professors wrote to me, and he said that really her research was so good they had to include her in the byline.
Huh.
You see, both my parents were clever, my grandmother too, but they didn't have an education. And of course, that makes your life so sterile. My you see, and my mother had a very difficult childhood because my grandmother, whom I loved dearly, and in many ways, not always, as you see, but in many ways, I'm rather like her. I'm this only small member of our family. All the others are very tall. I could never reach any of the cups. She was bored. My grandfather was out all day at his shop. He was a chemist. And he'd spent 4 years in the trenches of World War I and had learned really just to cut off from white. It was the only way you could probably survive that horror. And so she used to get drunk. She was an alcoholic. And my mother would come home and find her drunk every day. And so there was and her older sister was so damaged. My mother had her difficulties, but the older sister was so damaged that she just left her own children.
Wow.
It's very rare for
my
mothers to leave their children.
Right.
And they had to come and live with us. And they were very sort of themselves very distressed children, as you can imagine. So my childhood was difficult, and reading, to me, was a wonderful escape to another world, other worlds, which it gave me an idea that there were other worlds.
How old were you when your father had to declare bankruptcy? Because that's a traumatic.
Yes. I was about 13 or 14.
So you remember clearly what this meant for the family.
Yes. Oh, yes. Though we were never told it. It was all sort of secret. But of course we knew that something was dreadfully wrong.
Right.
And my father just sitting at home all day. And of course, my school fees had to be paid by a charity because I didn't take the 11 plus, which could have got me a free place. So, life wasn't easy, and it may be that was why I went into a convent to find a serenity and a depth that away from this sadness and anxiety that I had because of all this.
You also, it sounds like, this is the first description I remember in any of your books about how important the natural environment and where you grew up was. Describe this area of England.
Yes.
It's West Central England, isn't it?
No.
Oh.
It's outside Birmingham.
Okay.
In the Midlands.
In the Midlands.
Worcestershire.
Okay.
But in those days, it was countryside. It was about 15 miles away from Birmingham.
Okay.
And I used to go to school. Went to school in Birmingham. My father would drive me in. And that was 15 miles in those days with little tiny lanes and not very fast cars. It took a long time to get there. It would be no distance at all now, of course. But it was unspoilt country. There's a little village called Wildmoor, which consisted of 4 houses. We rented one of them. And we used to go into the woods, and that's where as I write there, that I used to see in the woods a strange kind of luminous light, nothing very like ordinary light. And I kept pointing it out to my parents and calling it Putsch. I guess I couldn't speak very well. Putsch, I said, and they said, yes, darling. And I think they thought I was pretending that there were fairies there. And when I used to go out for walks, I had to stop and talk to certain bushes, and special bushes and special trees. When my mother was pushing my sister in the pram, we'd had to stop while I went and said hello to all these people. So for me, the landscape was alive. And I think, as I say in my book, that's what I felt Wordsworth was, saying in his wonderful poem, where he says, there was a time when meadow, grove, and stream, the earth and every common sight to me did seem apparelled in celestial light, the glory and the freshness of a dream. It is not now as it hath been of yore, turn wheresoe'er I may, by night or day, there hath passed away a glory from the earth. That these, he remembers those. I think perhaps children do see things, their brains are slightly different, and you haven't learned rationalism yet. And logic, and
that's good.
You haven't learned to define things.
Right.
A word that means to set limits on something. And I think you used to live in my imagination, I think, and though I wasn't a Wordsworth, of course.
You talk about the radiance of the landscape that you were growing up in. I always think it's interesting about how the childhood landscape is influential in the way a writer accesses their imagination or remembers the meaning of their surroundings. Well, what would you say today about how important that?
It's crucial, I think, because we know we're in terrible trouble with the natural world. We know that we're in great danger, and we mistreated it. And as I try and write in this book, and I show how people saw nature in other parts of the world, they had a very different notion of religion or God. And I liked, there's a story that when the Jesuits in the 17th century, the Jesuit priests went out as missionaries to China, and they wore Chinese clothes, and they learnt Chinese, and they were going to convert them all to Christianity. They didn't succeed in that, of course. But the Chinese were very interested in Western science. Because they'd Galileo and Copernicus and all those things that had caused a lot of trouble and distress in Europe at the time, because they were quite shocking ideas. The Chinese took all that science in their stride. They thought it was wonderful. But when they started hearing the Jesuits talking about a God stuck in a tiny part of the universe that he's supposed to have created, way above the earth, they thought this was really weird. And they couldn't get their head around this. And one of them said that, the Jesuits are very good in material investigation, but they don't understand the qi. And the qi is what the Chinese called, was their sacrality. It wasn't a god, but it was a force, a force that infused the whole of that brought the whole world into being. It was constantly churning, producing things, producing new things. It was present in every single mountain or rock or tree or sea, and constantly keeping the world in motion. And it was a sacred force. And interestingly, thousands of miles away, the people of India developed exactly the same kind of divinity. There were gods, but the gods were created by this force, like trees and mountains. They called the Indians called it Rita or Brahman. And this seems to have been an archetypal idea. And I think it's very important. We've had some Wordsworth just now.
Yes.
But Wordsworth, he saw nature lose that sacrality, lose that sense of the divinity there within it. And he said he'd learned to look on nature differently. In one of his great poems, he said, "I have learned to look at nature differently." And I think we've got to try and do the same now. And what he comes out with is exactly like what the Chinese saw and what the Indians saw in Qi and Rita. He says, "For I have learned to look at nature in a different way, hearing oftentimes the still sad music of humanity, nor harsh, nor grating, though of ample power to chasten and subdue. And I have felt a presence that disturbs me with the joy of elevated thoughts, a sense sublime of something far more deeply interfused, whose dwelling is the light of setting suns, and the round ocean, and the living air, and the blue sky, and in the mind of man. A motion and a spirit that impels all thinking things, all objects of all thought, and rolls through all things." And that is a perfect description of what the Chinese call qi, something that this sacred force that rolls through all things. And notice, he won't call it God. He says something. Now, we use the word something, don't we, very loosely. What shall we have for supper today? Or I don't know,
Right.
Soup or something.
Right.
But he uses words very precisely. It's something. We can't name it because it isn't in our vocabulary. Mm-hmm. But it is something that rolls through all things, that keeps things in being. And that's how the Chinese called it Qi, the Taoists called it Tao, the way, and Brahman and Rita. And so ingrained is it in the human mind that it emerges in Christianity and Judaism too. Because Judaism and Christianity, where other religions saw the divine in nature, Jews and Christians saw the divine in historical events, in like the Exodus from Egypt, or the life of Jesus Christ. But in the Jewish Kabbalah, you have something just like Qi, Rita, Brahman. They see the divine emanating out from itself like a great force and bringing everything into being, and constantly churning out constantly imbuing the whole world with life and holiness. And it emerges too with the Greek Orthodox, who never lost their ancient sense, their pagan sense of nature, because their goddess Artemis was one of the most worshipped of all the gods. And she was in every single flower, every single tree, every single cloud, every river, but you never saw her. She was just there present, keeping everything in being. And that, we've lost that. Interestingly, Islam has a much better understanding of nature than the other two monotheisms. Islam says that nature is a revelation of the divine that is equal to the Quran. And constantly in the Quran, you have these wonderful paeans in praise of nature, which is extraordinary when you think that this came into being in Saudi Arabia with that terrible climate.
Yeah.
Where they could not, so barren and hot and awful was it, that they could not grow enough food for themselves and were constantly having to sort of take it from one another. They were all half-starved. And yet you have this paean of praise in nature. But unlike the monotheists, where we focus on God's miracles that overturn nature, that do unnatural things.
Right.
In the Quran, it's the orderliness of nature, that the fact that the sun rises every morning and sinks every night, which it's exactly the way the Egyptians saw their religion. They thought they would follow the path of the sun, which is all very clear in Egypt, and follow the sun, the priests, all day as it rose up to the sky and went down at night, and then it went into the world of the dead at night and died a death and had to be brought to life again in the morning so that it could rise again. So these poetic ideas, but it also shows the fragility of nature there, a sense that the sun might not rise in the morning. We shouldn't take it for granted that nature will always be so orderly and kind to us.
I think that leads us to, I think I would call this the urgent call in the book to not, you're concerned about how removed we have become from nature, that we experience it episodically. We're often, taking pictures. We are removed and not immersed in nature. What do you think the consequence of that has been?
Well, I think the consequence has been drastic, and we're increasing this now. I mean, it's getting worse because we don't see the divine as sacred. We see it simply as a resource. This happened in about the 16th century when Bacon, the great philosopher, the English philosopher, said that, that we must now obey God's command to Adam. God said to Adam, after the creation, now take the earth and subdue it. And that's what we've done. We have tried to subdue the earth. We have used it as a resource. We no longer look at it with wonder or be thankful. We're no longer thankful for the fact that we have a universe that works. And we are so removed, as you say, that when you're in a beautiful place how often people take about 20 photographs of this beautiful place and never look at it. They prefer a sort of a synthetic reproduction of it. And this is beginning to happen now in other ways. We've closed our minds to nature. And so what I'm trying to do in this book is show how we can perhaps introduce some practices in our lives that renews that relationship with nature. The Chinese, for example, had a system that they called quiet sitting. And that didn't mean you sat in the yogic position and breathed or anything. You just sat in a comfortable chair at ease, but watched the sounds of nature. Listened to the birds, looked at the insects, looked at the trees, looked at the sun, and keep that bond with nature. We should do that, I think, just for a start, 10 minutes a day. Just to renew that and to make ourselves aware of things that we just don't notice. Notice the way the birds behave, the way the flowers come. I have a tree in just opposite my study. I mean, I live in the middle of London, so there's not much nature there, though I have a nice little garden. But there's a tree that is huge. It overtowers the houses opposite me. And it's not so good in the summer when it's all just leaves. Mm-hmm. But when the leaves start falling, you begin to see the life in that tree. How it constantly changing color, day by day. And the creatures that come and go, the squirrels, the different birds, the life that is going on in that tree. And it gradually, every year it goes through the same system. And what we've got to understand is that tree has a life of its own. Now, that doesn't mean we start talking to the tree, as if it was a human being, because it's not a human being. It's entirely different from us. It's got an entirely different nature, which is mysterious to us. As does every tree, every little animal. Like the clouds, the universe, it has a life entirely different from ours, but one which we must learn to value, look at, wonder at, and respect.
You've reminded me of a favorite novel. I bet our audience knows what I'm going to talk about. Richard Powers' The Overstory. Have you read that by any chance?
No.
You said that some of the science of trees, mysteries remain, but there's some very interesting science developing about how trees communicate with one another and help one another when one tree is in distress and sends signals to each other. Richard Powers wrote a wonderful novel about it that you can really access the science. I'm struck by, you've used the word wonder a number of times in the conversation so far. I'm struck by how we seem to live in a kind of world where you have to one-up the wonder to be awed.
Yes.
Like it has to be that much more incredible that you've seen one canyon, you've seen, that kind of. Mm-hmm. And to hear you talk about the life of this tree reminds me that you can push that sense of what are you going to do to thrill me now, in nature, and zero back in on something small and...
Yes, something small and learn to wonder at it.
Right.
That has a life that we don't know about. That is helping to keep us in being. The way the whole universe reacts. What I do, each chapter, I suggest a certain practice, and one of the chapters is called sacrifice. Now, we think of sacrifice, as horrible pagans killing lovely animals in temples. But we don't give a thought to the millions of beasts who are slaughtered heartlessly every day in our abattoirs. And at least in the ancient world, you didn't eat red meat unless it had somehow been made holy and blessed and sort of honored for what it was going to give you. But the word sacrifice, actually, it comes from the Latin sacrum facere, which means to make holy. And so what the priests were doing were making that animal sacred and holy, or bringing out the holiness in it. And that's what we must try and do. Look at that tree and see it. It's sacred. It fills us with wonder. It's different from us. It has an entire life of us, but it is a sacred thing, just as each one of us is a sacred being. And learn to so that if every time during the day we look at a tree or a flower or a little insect or a wasp, look at that and wonder at the life of that being, which is utterly mysterious to us, utterly precious, and on which we depend. We depend so much on tiny things in nature that we don't...
interconnectedness.
We're just not aware of.
Right. You know, it struck me in listening to you talk about your experience in the middle of London, a small garden, a tree that you are watching the evolution of year to year. Was there something about the isolation of the pandemic that you weren't doing the kind of traveling, you were not seeing people the way you probably see people, that brought you back to a kind of sensibility that opened your mind to this kind of writing? I was surprised when I saw what the essence of this book was about.
Yes, because it's unlike my other books.
It's not, that's right. It
Yes.
has this kind of, I don't think we've ever talked about this kind of thing in all of our interviews. So I'm curious about what was happening outside your door.
Yes.
Gave you the kind of silence and isolation you needed for this.
I think so, because I was spending more time in the garden and looking at that tree, and instead of sitting on aeroplanes and traveling and speaking. And that made me start looking at nature differently. And at first I thought, well, I want to write a book about this. So I suggested to my publishers in a Zoom call that...
Oh, the evil Zoom. We talked about that, yeah.
But I said, you know, I'll do one of my big books about showing the history of how people have used nature, how the Chinese did it, how the Indians did it. And they said, Karen, this time do a short one. Because they said people need to read this now.
Yes.
They said, you can do the big one later. But do a short one because we're in a terrible plight. I mean, I don't know how it's been here but we've had unprecedented heat in London, absolutely unprecedented, and of course, look at the terrible floods in China.
Yes,
where I have many friends, and have been talking to them. The devastation is shocking. And this is just the beginning. And it's no good scaring ourselves, because scaring ourselves makes us sort of paralyzed. And we stop, we freeze, and we don't know what to do. But instead, we've got to make a gigantic effort to pull back from the way we've mistreated nature. By wondering at it. So that's why I thought of suggesting these small things that people could do that could change the way we think. We have to change. It's not enough. We have to change our behavior towards nature, but we also have to change the way we think about it. Otherwise, it becomes a sheer mechanical thing with which we're not identifying. And so I decided to write this little book instead.
Pleasing your publishers. When I read what you wrote about this absence of veneration for nature, that's another word that you use, I thought of that quote from Terry Tempest Williams about how wildness reminds us of what it means to be human. We have definitely lost that sensibility.
We have.
What does that say to you? Her words, what do they say to you?
Yes, because we are utterly dependent upon this wildness, this nature. We depend upon it for every breath we take. We depend upon the food we eat, the food we grow. This is our home. It's our home. And look how we look after our homes, our houses, and cherish them. And yet this nature is our home, and yet here we are trashing it.
Yeah.
Trashing it every day. I mean, and we still, in England anyway, sitting on beaches and littering it with plastic, which is ruining marine life. And we've been told about this again and again and again, but we don't seem to take any notice. And so we need a change of mind. It's no good just us having orders given to us, well, do this, do that.
Right. It
Because
doesn't work.
It doesn't work. We've got to change the way we think and behave towards nature. And so that's what I was trying to do.
Why don't we read the first excerpt, if you're ready
Yes.
for that?
Yes.
And we're coming back to Wordsworth.
We're coming back to Wordsworth,
Right.
with a different poem this time. Wordsworth recalled the luminous vision of the world that he had enjoyed as a boy, but had lost as a grown-up, rather as I had. There was a time when meadow, grove, and stream, the earth and every common sight, to me did seem apparelled in celestial light, the glory and the freshness of a dream. It is not now as it hath been of yore. Turn wheresoe'er I may, by night or day, the things which I have seen, I now can see no more. He is still aware of the beauty of nature, but knows that there hath passed away a glory from the earth. He sees a tree and a field that both speak of something that hath gone. Whither is fled the visionary gleam? Where is it now, the glory and the dream? In my own humble way, I recall something similar. I grew up in the unspoiled Worcestershire countryside in the late 1940s and distinctly remember trying to tell my puzzled parents about something I called putsch. There was no word I knew of for what I could recall as a strange but compelling luminosity in the woods and lanes near our home that I could not make my adult companions see. They assumed I was thinking of the fairies pictured in my storybooks, but it was more of an impersonal, all-encompassing radiance. Once I went to school to be inducted into the rational worldview that governs modern life, I, like Wordsworth, experienced the light and glory die away and fade into the light of common day.
شو جوونی دی بلا بلا لام دی بلا سوزتی کالام دی بلا بلا لام دی بلا بنالام تو منام سایه کمر سوز کموتر دی بلال چه خشن بازی کنی با زلف یارت دی بلال شو مهتاب و صبح پا دیار بمونی دی بلال بلا بلالام دی بلال بنالام تو منام یه گلی سایه کم تازه شکفته دی نه دستم بر شیرسه نه خوشی افتاده بلام ای خدا کورم بکن من مال نگردم دی بلام نومزاده چند سالمه دادن به مردم دی بلام بلا بلالام دی بلام سوزتی کالام دی بلام بلالام دی بلام بنالام تو منام بلالام دی بلام سوزتی کالام دی بلالام دی بلام سوزتی
Ida, don't leave. Ida Shegasemi. Don't leave yet. I want to ask you about, you were singing in Farsi, right?
Yes, that is right.
What's the song about?
It's actually a very old folk Iranian song from the Bakhtiari dialect, which is where my dad is from in southern Iran.
Uh-huh.
And it begins with how there are three things in life that we don't appreciate and we kind of take for advantage. And that's a moonlit night, spring, and youth. So make the most of it while you have it. And then it goes on to being like the typical love story that is of folk songs in Iran where someone has been lost and you are kind of mourning their loss.
It's beautiful. Thank you. Thank
Thank
you
you.
for being here.
Thank you for having me.
You're listening to Talking Volumes at the Fitzgerald Theater with Karen Armstrong. Her new book is titled Sacred Nature, Restoring Our Ancient Bond with the Natural World. And I'm Kerri Miller. Karen, I'm an admirer of evangelical climate scientist Katharine Hayhoe. Do you know of her? Have you read anything? She is the chief scientist now for the Nature Conservancy, but she lives in Texas. She's an evangelical, so she is able to go into churches to talk with credibility into faith communities to talk about why conservation is an act of faith. and she's incredibly effective. What I'm curious about from you is whether you think there is a role for contemporary faith leaders to ring the bell and increase the urgency about climate change, given some of the way the texts are interpreted in some of these evangelical communities.
Absolutely. I think that's wonderful. I'd love to hear about this woman. And of course, we have to change things. And so we have a mission, and it's terrible that priests and abbots and nuns are not doing this. I was talking yesterday to a group of people, and they were pointing out that there were people doing things about nature, pointing out that this, that, and the other. But this is so dangerous. We're in such peril that every single bishop or rabbi, imam, every single Buddhist peer should be talking to their flocks about saving nature, because it is sacred. We've lost that sense of sacrality in the West, but we must renew it. It's absolutely urgent. And yes, religious leaders have a major work to do, because speaking out about this, but not in a way that terrifies people, or not in a way that's endlessly scolding people, because that just makes people seize up.
Right.
I think that people need to be taught how to change their minds, as I've tried to do in that book.
Yes.
Little by little, introducing little new habits day by day. And we talk about, we've got to change, I've changed my mind, we say. Well, now we really need a change of mind. And we need to make a real effort about this. And certainly religious leaders should they've got to do it in a certain way. I mean, I know the Pope has brought out an encyclical.
Right.
But it's not very readable. You know.
I haven't read it.
No, there you go.
All right.
Because we should be moved by it, and not just frightened. It's no good just scolding us for our misdeeds and telling dreadful tales about what's going to happen to us, because that just makes us seize up. It's what, you know, when people used to talk to me as a child about hell, it didn't make me any better. I just sort of seized up. But so they've got to teach us, as I've tried to do, from the pulpits, to change the way we think about nature.
The reason I asked you about evangelical communities, there is and I don't know how persistent this has been, but there was a time when the focus was on the next life.
Yes.
And not to have to be too concerned about caring for the world here.
Not just evangelicals, that was certainly present in my Catholic faith.
It was.
It definitely. I don't think we ever had a single talk about nature or the beauty of the world. It was all about getting into heaven and not going to hell. And we always had a retreat, and as in the convent too, when I was a nun. We had a retreat every year going through the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius Loyola, founder of the Jesuit order. And the first day was all about hell and death and terrible stories about people sort of dropping dead, you know, in the street and they hadn't been to confession and that kind of thing, and ended up in hell. And the thing is, this and heaven. I remember my grandmother actually was told, when being told that she was going to be singing "Glory be to God" forever, she said, "I don't want to go to heaven. It sounds far too boring." she got a severe telling off for this, but you see, this just paralyzes us, and it's all about the next world, not this one. And we're living in a world, in a paradise, really. In the beauty of your country, this country, for example, it's amazing. When you fly over it, you see the difference, the different versions.
Right.
It's amazing, and beautiful Britain too, in parts. The parts we have ruined with horrible cities. But we're not taught to look at nature as we are taught how to read poetry, to appreciate poetry, or to listen to music and learn to appreciate that. We need to cultivate these things. We need help to do it.
I wonder if because, and I don't know, maybe this did not happen in Britain, but of course, climate change and the answers to it has been politicized here. And I think that may be why some faith leaders shrink away from speaking candidly and persuasively to their congregations and their communities about it.
It may be, but it is also the fact that there isn't very much talk about nature in Christianity. You see, we've got St. Francis, and everyone brings him out, but he's basically the only one.
Yeah.
The fact that he, talks about Brother Sun and Sister Moon, and this is lovely, and I put it in the book.
Yes,
this
you did.
lovely poem. Yeah. And he saw the beauty of nature, but we don't. We're concentrating on the next life more than on this one, or on the life of Christ, or the life of saints. And this is all very edifying, but it's not making us look at the world that God has supposedly created, and which we're daily destroying.
Why do you think the Bible does not speak more about? Again, you said in your book that there is this perception from the Bible that nature is subservient to our needs.
Yes, it's because, as I think I said earlier, the Bible isn't interested in nature. It has found sacrality, and this is important too in historical events. It sees God, the divine, in history, and this is important, and we have to try and see that the sacrality of history. And when it's going wrong, we have to rush in and save it. We're supposed to do that. We're supposed to do that and reform and look after the poor, for example, which we're told about. But there's very little about nature. And if it is, I think I give a quote from one of the Psalms, where the nature is subservient to God. Everything, all the birds and the leaves and everything, they do what God wants. But God is in those leaves. God is in those mountains and in these trees, and we should be looking at the sacrality and divinity in that, and making ourselves look at it. Sacrum facere, I should have said this earlier, to make holy. We should make a habit of, when we walk around the world, looking at a tree and looking at seeing the divine in it. Looking at it and saying, look at that tree, look at that river, look at those wonderful animals playing. And the divine is in all those things, because God is everywhere. Now, Thomas Aquinas knew that. He says God is everywhere. And wherever God is there holy. He's there holy. And so, but we lost that perception, and we haven't cultivated it. And the Bible doesn't do it for us. But it's important that we look at history too, because wonderful things do happen in history, and it's important to rescue people who are suffering around us, and change history and make it adhere to a more charitable, sacred world where we love one another, where we respect one another, we see the divine in one another, but now also see the divine in nature too, and not see it simply as a resource.
I mean, this really intersects with the work that you've done on compassion.
Yes.
Every now and then I check in to see what's happening with the Charter for Compassion, because we've been talking about it for many years. Maybe we should explain what it is. Could you explain how it came about?
Yes, I won the TED Prize some years ago. TED, you all know about, I'm sure.
Yeah, TED Talks.
TED Talks. And they gave me a prize, and they give you a wish for a better world, which TED will make happen. And I knew...
Ted, whoever he is, will make it happen.
And I knew once what I wanted, because I was sick and tired of hearing religious people fulminating about the sins of other people, and when what we're told to do is to love one another. And that compassion, the ability to feel with others, is seen as absolutely central to every single religious tradition. And that means everyone, not just our own particular buddies, but and we should look at the lack of compassion in our politics, in our class systems, the fact that we should be horrified that I have people sleeping in the street in London, a rich city. We've been seeing how much money the Queen has had. I wish she'd just given it to some more of the people who are in dire straits, and things are going to get worse, as we know. Mm. So compassion. So I started this, and we got together. TED got together a whole group of people who we met in Geneva. And there was somebody representing every single world faith.
It's incredible.
So there was a mufti from Egypt. There were Buddhists, various kinds of Christians, Jews, Muslims. Everyone was there. We sat around the table, and together we worked out a charter, which I eventually pieced together. And afterwards, we emailed each other and said, "What do you think of this?" etc. And we presented it, and it has some good work is being done, but the best of it is in Pakistan.
Wow.
I go there frequently, and a great friend, a businessman, I got him to cut. I know he is a businessman who does wonderful good works. He really does, and his family support him. They own all the big hotels in Pakistan, and he has to do his job with them, but they respect what he's trying to do. And I said, I want you to, I had him come to us in Geneva to listen. And he said, at first, I didn't understand this. He said, but then I got it. And he did get it. What he got, he put out a questionnaire in Karachi and said, because we were making cities of compassion, where the mayor would declare it was going to be a compassionate city. What would you like to see in Karachi that would what would you like us to focus on? They said education. Right, he said. So he got together a group of leading educationalists in Pakistan, and together they introduced compassion into every subject of the curriculum. Wow. In terms of in history, for example, learning, how people behave
Hugely
compassionately
important.
in history, in literature, in science. And all the schools in the province of Sindh have become compassionate schools,
Wow.
and they have to take this syllabus. But not only that, because these government schools tend to be for the well-to-do children, the richer children. So each school has to take partner with one of the poor schools in the poor areas, and they play together. They play cricket together. They call it compassionate cricket, and they share books. And the rich children, see the way,
Right.
how the poor children live instead of living in a dream. So now, as I say, and they're now going into the next state as well, and. He really is because he's the best. That a bit of it, some of it's a bit airy-fairy in other ways. We're going to be a loving person from down this day forward when we're not. We have to try and make it as practical as possible.
But that's why I see
Yes.
what you're writing here as a continuation, as an intersection of your work on compassion.
It is, because each chapter tells you something that you've got to do in your own life to start building up this sense of love of nature. It's no good just wandering out hoping that you'll get a little Wordsworthian uplift now and again.
Right.
We have to, changing our minds
Yes.
means changing the way we live and
Right.
the way we think and the way we behave. And it is a form of compassion. We have to be compassionate now to the environment, to nature, instead of just using it as a resource and bullying it, as it were.
I have to ask you about the Queen because we talked about it in the green room, and Karen had some very interesting things to say. You left the UK, what, just as the Queen died?
No, just before she died.
Just before she died.
No, just after she died.
Okay.
Just after she died.
And you have been puzzled by seeing the outpour, just the
astonished.
fervency of the emotion.
Yes, I'm absolutely astonished.
Why?
Well, we hardly ever see the Queen, and I've always felt rather sorry for the woman. What a life she's had, frankly. But she was 96.
Yes.
It was time she was going to die, clearly, and I'm very glad. I'm glad she died so quickly, because I wouldn't wanted anyone to have a long, protracted death. But there's also. We now know how very rich the royal family are, and we've got this massive divide in the country of massive poverty, which is going to get worse because of the Ukraine war and the price of gas going up.
Yes.
And the households are not going to be able to heat their homes. So I'm puzzled. I'm a bit scared about going home, but I'm very puzzled as to what this has happened.
And we were talking about whether this is nostalgia, a sense that she was an icon of consistency and stability in a world that feels it's chaotic and unpredictable.
That seems to have happened. I'm puzzled by it, I have to say. It seems I'll have to look at it hard when I get home and see it, but it's almost a kind of. But it went 20 years ago. You see, when Diana got killed, it was the other way around. Everyone was furious with the Queen.
Yes.
And mourning Diana. Maybe the Queen stands in as God in a kind of way. you know, as somebody that's distant,
Yes.
revered, on another plane from us, in a way, at least economically. That gives them some sense of identity and meaning as what it means to be British. I find that extraordinary. I'm very puzzled by it. Well, what can I say?
We see your puzzlement.
Yes.
I know. How about one last excerpt from the book?
All right.
Right.
So, to glimpse the sacrality of the natural world requires a degree of quiet and solitude that is hard to come by today. Indeed, we seem to find silence alien and often deliberately eliminate it from our lives. We wear earphones while exercising or walking in a park and chatter tirelessly on our mobile phones on a deserted beach. As a result, the sounds of nature have retreated and become increasingly distant from our minds and hearts. If we want to halt the environmental crisis, we need first, like Coleridge, to seek a silent receptiveness to the natural world, bringing it into our lives little by little every day. As Coleridge feels the hush of nature harmonizing with the stillness of his own mind, Coleridge promises his baby son that he will not grow up in towns and cities, as the poet himself did, but will wander like a breeze by lakes and sandy shores. Immersed in nature, he will see and hear the lovely shapes and sounds intelligible of that eternal language which thy God utters, who from eternity doth teach himself in all, and all things in himself. As a result of his attentiveness, Coleridge did not experience a deity confined to heaven like the God of Newton or Descartes. Instead, like nearly all the great poets, mystics, and philosophers we have met in this book, he sees the divine as inseparable from nature. In an earlier poem, The Aeolian Harp, he had asked his readers to cultivate a similar awareness for themselves, of that one life within us and abroad, which meets all motion and becomes its soul, a light in sound, a sound-like power in light, rhythm in all thought, and joyous everywhere.
تو چشم سیاه داری تو تا موی رها داری توی سینه صفا داری توی قلبت وفا صف عشاق بدبختم از اینجا تا کجا داری خبر داری خبر داری که این دنیا همش رنگ توی سینات صفا داری توی قلبت وفا سفر و شوق بد از اینجا تا کجا
Thank you. Oh, beautiful.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Wow. I'm so glad you came because we might not have heard that except for you being here. So we're going to bring the house lights up for questions. But one of the things that Karen and I were talking about down in the green room was how grateful we are to have in-person events again. And especially with writers, because a lot of writers are not going out on tour. And
I was expecting to do an ordinary tour now, because going to about 8 or 9 cities, and my publisher said, "No, we're not doing that anymore. We're doing Zoom." Now, I have spent the last 5 months talking about this book on Zoom to people from Canada and Africa and England, my own fellow countrymen. I talked to them on Zoom. But this is, what's happening is we're doing now to human beings what we've been doing to nature.
right.
Obviously, we've got to be careful about the pandemic and keep things, keep it under control. But I think if we don't talk about our work, our writing, our thoughts, we'll lose a great deal. We must. We must feel and discuss, learn together, worry, and announce our worries together, but work together to save our planet. And we must work together for a more compassionate world. What we're doing is we're doing to other human beings what we're doing now, what we've been doing to nature for years. No longer communing with ourselves, but retreating. And we'll be retreating into Zoom and retreating into technology and not seeing the divine in everyone we meet, which is what we should be doing. And, you know, they're I'm only doing, normally I'm on the road for 3 weeks. This time I'm only here for 1 week. And I'm doing 4 cities.
We're grateful this is one of them.
Yes.
All right, so questions right over there with Tom.
Hi. So I heard you speak about the lack of wonder, the lack of awe that we experience, and also about the lack of compassion that has been disturbing to you. And I wonder if at the root of both of those things is a loss of curiosity, is a loss of the capacity to embrace our own unknowing.
That's very interesting. It may well be, because we're not very introspective anymore, are we? We no longer search our minds and hearts, but we're in danger now of retreating into ourselves and not reaching out to our fellow human beings. And I think we're being encouraged to turn in upon ourselves a bit too much by being enclosed in our houses, concerned about our own health, concerned about warding off the disease, and we're not reaching out nearly sufficiently to our fellow people in other countries, in other parts of the world either. We're lacking in curiosity, I think, and lacking in a sense of wonder at the human being. Each one of us is a unique expression of the divine. Each one of us expresses the divine in an entirely different way, and it shows the impossibility of ever defining the divine. Because if you think each one of us somehow represents the divine, we can't sum up the divine. Well, we've lost that sense of wonder, curiosity, and we don't value difference enough. We're not valuing the otherness of being. When the cherubs were in front of God, they cry, "Holy, holy, holy." And holiness meant otherness, something that is different, transcendent, and goes beyond what we can imagine. And we're not, by not reaching out to others, not being curious about others, we're confining ourselves to a very small view of reality. This is very serious, and it is what we're doing also to nature. We no longer see the otherness of nature, no longer see its wonders, no longer cultivate a sense of the other. Otherness is holiness. As I say, the cherubs cry, "Holy, holy, holy," other, other, other. And yet that will enrich us, and we need to expand our minds so that we are seeing reality as it is, as something that we can't sum up, that is mysterious but utterly precious, and now in danger. Our world is in danger. Our natural world is in danger, and the human race is therefore in danger because we lack that sense of concern for other.
a question right on this side.
Hello, Kerri. It's Howard from Fridley. I've called in several times. Miss Armstrong, I'm a Presbyterian minister by training, and your books have been signposts on my journey for 20 years. So I want to thank you for your scholarship and your witness to compassion. Mohammed was an important book for me because I've been to Beirut 3 times doing art therapy with refugee children. Since the war started in Ukraine, I've been there 3 times doing art therapy with the children. But a memory that I have from Beirut that came back when Minneapolis became the first major American city to allow the minaret to have the call to prayer. In Beirut, I wanted to ask about the synchronicities in nature because a call went out and I was jogging early one morning and the birds sang back. So I offered that to Minneapolis. When we hear the call to the minaret, listen for the birds singing back.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
Thank you. He added, synchronicity is in nature. Yes. Another question. I see hands right over there.
I am wondering if I could get you to amend your comments about the Bible just a little bit. I am assuming that we're in a Christian community here, that most of us are, okay, or whatever. I may be wrong assumption, but the hot biblical literature is probably familiar to most of this audience. And I understand some of your criticisms of the Bible, but on the other hand, from the book of Genesis, where Hagar says, in paraphrase, "In this place I've seen the one who sees me," and then when we go through the environmental comments of the major prophets, and when God just knocks us out in the book of Job, and Job, who is so righteous, finally repents in dust and ashes. I mean, I find that some of the biblical, and Jesus' ministry is so earthy that we have missed this message, and it's our fault. So can I get you to...
Job is in the book.
Job is in the book.
Good.
No,
Okay.
Job is in the book, and it is wonderful. And I've said that Job is really a prophet for our time.
Yeah.
Because Job, as you know the story, of course, that Job is struck by disease as a sort of competition he's having with Satan. But at the end, Job he laments all his sufferings. He goes on and on in wonderful poetry about the darkness of his life and how he's been ill-used. But then God comes in, and this absolute paean in praise of the natural world, looking at the magnificence of animals, the animals of a goat in the forests. They're free and happy, and the horse is the most magnificent creature in God's kingdom. They put human beings to shame, but he is a prophet for our time. He looks at nature, he revels in it, he goes beyond his preoccupation with humanity, and I think he's someone we can learn it from, and it's also the most brilliant poetry in the whole Bible. It's extraordinary, and it tells us, get outside our over-concern with humanity, with our own problems, our own griefs, our own sufferings, and make ourselves look at the wonders of the world and honor it. And so I agree with you that here in the book of Job, you really do have a wonderful paean in praise of nature. But the fact remains, and I'll stick to this, that nature isn't a primary concern in the Bible. That's all I'm saying. But it does do other things, and I also said that. What it does is tell us to look at history, look at and in Christianity too, we have a cry for equality. Especially in St. Paul, who's often much maligned, but he only wrote 7 of those letters. The others were trying to rein him in, and were written in the as late as the early 2nd century. But those 7 letters, he is all for crying out for equality. In Christ, there's neither Jew nor Greek, male nor female, slave nor free. And that is a very, very strong message for our time. My next book may be about equality or inequality in religion, because that's another major difficulty that we have. We've talked about the inequity of rich and poor in our countries, but now we've got somehow to see how we can. We talk a lot about equality, especially here in the United States, but we don't always fulfill it. So that, and here in St. Paul, we have a cry for that. But now we're living in a global world. We have the privilege and the opportunity to learn from others, learn from the wisdom of others. It doesn't mean you abandon your own faith. You enrich it by looking at new and unexpected other things that, they put things in a different light suddenly. And it also helps to bring different parts of the world together. Learning, for example, to value the Chinese religion, when we really find China rather frightening today, very often today. And I went once to, I used to be a trustee of the British Museum, and I was sent by the British Museum to represent the museum at the 60th anniversary of the Shanghai Museum. And I talked to them about the museum, our museum, and museums in general, but I also talked about Confucius and the Chinese philosophers, and they loved it, but they'd forgot. They said, we don't know any of this anymore.
Wow.
So that all that is lost. But there is a very important Chinese movement that is focusing on Confucius and is approved by the Chinese government. We're not decrying the Bible, but what we're doing is seeing that the divine is so huge, so impossible to comprehend, impossible to sum up in a single volume, a single scripture, because God is infinite. So there is the divine is infinite, and so to learn from other cultures, to learn from other scriptures, doesn't diminish our faith in the divine. It enhances it and makes us see our own in a different light, I think.
I'll just read a paragraph. Do you have the book yet? The lady that just, on page 64. What is the book of Job trying to tell us? There are no clear teachings or directions. God does not really answer any of Job's questions. Instead, he dazzles him with an overwhelmingly eloquent description of nature that finally reduces even the loquacious Job to silence. I like that part. Thank you all very much for coming. Let me mention this. There are pre-signed books. Karen signed a bunch of books beforehand. We'll see how she's feeling, whether she can sign after the event. She says she will. But if you'd like a pre-signed book, you can buy one out. And thank you very much for being here. We'll see you in October.